Hello and welcome to Fuel Poverty Action series of monthly learning sessions, Fuel for Thought from fuel poverty to climate justice. Fuel Poverty Action is a group of ordinary people fed up with being robbed by greedy energy companies through spiraling bills and rip-off prepayment meters. We campaign to protect people from fuel poverty. We challenge rip-off energy companies and unfair policies that leave people to endure cold homes. And we take action for warm, well-insulated homes, clean and affordable energy under the control of people and communities, not private companies. Fuel for Thought is our space to share research and lived experience, tackle lies and clear up confusion on fuel poverty and climate change as we ask and answer questions with experts, activists and campaigners. A small note on this session. I think most people here would agree that privatizing energy was a big mistake. Views differ about what to do now to ensure that everyone can access energy in a way that doesn't cause also harm to the planet. At FPA, we feel very passionately about cutting out profit extraction from the energy system to drive down energy prices. We want affordable and green energy to be starting point for decision making and for it to be carried out through a just transition that ensures workers stay in employment. And we're putting on this discussion to understand whether GB energy essentially can do that or not. And during the discussion, we're going to hear from a few different people on their views on GB energy, including everyone else who's here, hopefully. And just a note that views may differ, but all knowledge and perspectives are valuable. And just a little reminder that, as we explore this topic together, we encourage people to be hard on ideas, but gentle on each other. And while we encourage participants to speak up, I would also like to remind people to make space for others to contribute as well. Introducing the topic today is Adam Khan, who's here from Commonwealth. Adam leads research on the energy system with a particular focus on electricity. Before joining Commonwealth, Adam worked as an economist in the UK civil service, where he worked primarily on energy policy. He holds an MSc in economics and a policy of energy and the environment from UCL. Adam.
Great, thank you. Well, is the audio working? Yeah, okay. Brilliant. Okay, well, yeah, hi everyone. Really great to be here. As has been said, I'm Adam. I'm an analyst at think tank Commonwealth. So we're a research organisation focused on building the case for public ownership for a democratic and just economy. And I specifically focus on energy, and as previously worked on energy policy in the civil service. So, Amal, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, can hear you now.
Is that's a yes? I wonder if maybe do you want to move on to the next speaker, and then as I try and sort this out, my laptop. That's me.
Yeah, I think we might have to do that. Simon Coop is the Unite National Officer for Energy. Simon, thank you for being with us this evening.
No, and thank you, Amal. I'm so sorry I've got time constraints. I have another meeting after this talking about renationalisation and ownership models of energy. So we have much more work to do later on tonight as well. But let me start in regards to Great British Energy. Great British Energy is put forward as a flagship policy by the new Labour government. And what is it intending to do? What they're stating is it's intending to unlock investment. It's intending to unlock investment to create developments, working with private sector, as they state, and therefore creating jobs in clean, onshore, offshore wind energy, and also working in an offshoot with Great British Nuclear as well. It also states in the Prime Minister's press release with the Secretary of State for DESNZ, which is Ed Miliband, that it will create a UK supply chain in relation to that point. So let's pick the bones out of that first. We're in a position here where the current point on onshore and offshore wind is we have 5 or 6 key developers, which you can look at in some ways are private companies for UK, but are state-owned by other governments in the European Union, such as Vattenfall, Ørsted, and then you look at the other players with Siemens, Gamesa, etc. The UK currently, with these players within the shores and the production of this, the UK are the second global electricity generators through offshore and onshore wind. In regards to the supply chain, you would think we'd be similar levels in regards to that there were second generators in the globe on offshore and onshore wind, but unfortunately we're 16th to 18th in supply chain and manufacturing jobs in UK to supply offshore and onshore wind. And therefore, my role today is to talk about what GB Energy must mean and should mean for workers moving forward. At this point in time, for the workers and trade unionists, the wind, offshore and onshore revolution is welcome. It creates a balanced energy mix that creates more renewables in order to lower supposedly lower energy bills. That has currently not happened, and we continue to see raising energy bills. What we need to see is that we've not seen the job creation that were promised through this sector as well. We heard the Scottish government talking about very corny that Scotland would be the Dubai of offshore wind. But yet it's not created the 480,000 jobs in any way that it said it would create. And I know I'm being job specific, but if Great British Energy succeeds for workers, it has to create jobs on a level to ensure a just transition of people who are working in carbon emitting and fossil fuel industries as we currently see. Therefore, it is imperative that Great British Energy just doesn't lock private investment to fund projects or put public money into projects that private sector wouldn't go near. And why I say that is because the private sector at this point in energy is only investing in things that return profit margins and not investing for the social good of the energy market in the UK. We've also got a system at this point in time which goes through an auction, believe it or not. So we have wind developers that currently go through an auction process and bid to run offshore and onshore wind farms. They are set through auction prices based on profitability. And private companies are working together not to bid in areas so that the profitability margins go up at the next auction. And it manipulates the system for higher energy bills and not lower energy bills. So Great British Energy needs to also work in that sense to compete and overtake the private sector to become a significant player within industry if it's going to be a state-owned company. But it also can't just be a developer. Adam was clear that in the King's speech, it said it would produce. It said it would operate. At this point in time, we don't believe that it will produce and operate. It will just develop for a period of 5 to 6 years until it gets expertise and then it can operate. That needs to be quicker to make sure that we, as the state, as the taxpayer, as a company that can generate electricity, to then put the profits in from Great British Energy back in to the Treasury and purse, A, to lower energy bills, and B, to make sure that this proper sustainable investment without profitable returns in relation to that we won't invest if it's not profitable at these levels, but to ensure that there's a system and infrastructure place for all different things. So, for example, Great British Energy needs to be more of an investment tool. And let's be honest, the government is stating that this is going to be £8.3 billion over 6 years. That amount of money will not touch the sides in relation to what is needed for a move forward to a proper state-owned offshore wind energy system. My union, Unite the Union, and our National Industrial Sector Committee have made it clear that we believe all energy should be re-nationalised. We believe that it should not be privately owned for the sake of shareholder dividends to be paid and profits to be put back into other hedge funds, owners, and other states, but should be put back into the UK. And if that were the case, which Unite did a clear research paper of the £96 billion needed for the oil market, that would have lowered our energy bills through the crisis by £2,800 per in household without having to start looking at the energy price guarantee. And I just want to touch on that 1 second before I move back to Great British Energy. The energy price guarantee, which put the price cap during the crisis at £2,500, cost the taxpayer £26.5 billion. In order to buy the whole assets of energy production, transmission, distribution, and all energy mixers would cost £96 billion, with a book value that you could say maybe is higher at £110 billion. But let's be honest, we would own an asset that we then could do for the good of the UK to lower energy bills and for not one person then to be in energy poverty. Great British Energy also seems to be a key part of Labour's clean energy and just transition position, moving away from oil and gas and fossil fuels. Therefore, in order for that to succeed, we need to see a significant jobs plan. And that will not happen just as being a developer. And it will need to increase the supply chain. Unite believe that there needs to be alone £6.6 billion worth of investment over 6 years to create 30,000 jobs, just to make sure that the transition from North Sea oil and gas can be done in a just, fair way for workers, just on that basis. And therefore, Great British Energy can be a tool and a catalyst to ensure that transition piece happens. But if it's going to operate in the same private model, if it's going to operate in a way that unlocks investment just on the current situation and does not change the system, then I am worried about the project. But let's be clear. Let's be clear. This is an idea that's never ever been put on the table by any previous government. It's a start that has potential. It's a start that can be developed, and it should be developed by the voice of trade unions, government, and industry in that tripartite triangle to ensure that this works for consumers, that it works for workers, and that it works for energy security of supply to ensure that we have no more energy price spikes in the UK. But also, we are seeing energy companies such as Centrica making £3.3 billion in profit, SSE £2.2 billion in profit, EDF Nuclear Generation, £1 billion in profit, all paying shareholder dividends at levels. And we're still seeing companies considering whether they should transition gas storage into something else and invest in that, or just shut it down and not invest in a transition, but allow Great British Energy to do it, even though they've created billions and billions from our energy market. I think I'm over 7 minutes. I'm going to end it there, and I'm going to take questions. And I hope it's given you some fuel for thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Simon. Yeah, please, anyone who has questions, feel free to raise your hand, and I will bring you in. I'm also happy to welcome questions from Adam or Jonathan at this point, if you'd also like to come in.
Could I come in? Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, please.
Yeah, just kind of that was really good. Covered a lot of ground there. That was really good. I just sort of like to kind of semi-add or get an opinion on this bit, that the way I understand the GBE is one of the things it's going to be able to do is to cheapen the procurement and so on and development of offshore wind. So I think my understanding is that the GBE will invest initially. The way it's tackled is they have a pathway with initial development paid for by public investment. So the packages that they create then will be sold off to private developers of wind farms and so on a competitive tender basis. Now, what that does is it takes a lot of risk out. So you seabed, the plot, the idea is that the bundle of stuff that will be put together by GBE for offshore wind will be the contract for difference, the planning consent, and the grid connection. So for developers, this is fantastic. They just buy their way into a kind of bundled up, and I'm going to laugh if I use the phrase oven ready, but oven ready deal that they can just buy into and move forwards at a rapid rate of knots. So it means that all of the massive additional funding that the developers require and the risk capital they require or perceive themselves to require, that initial sort of J curve bit is removed from that picture. And overall, it's believed that that will make the procurement of wind farms much cheaper. I must confess, I think, yeah, it makes sense that the GBE would move into development of some sort, maybe develop and operate. I'm not so familiar on that, but it's just an opinion that the offshore wind will become radically cheaper just on that bundled package basis. Thank you.
Shall I take John as well? And then try and come back on both if I can.
Sounds good, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
John, you've got your hand up. Would you like to come in?
Hang on. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Right. I'm just wondering if the GB Energy will have anything also aimed at the consumer side, because I'm very keen on what you can do with the combination of solar panels, heat pumps, and home batteries. I have basically got rid of my energy bills in my house. Last year, my energy bill was zero coming into this year. And that has cost me an investment of about £20,000 in solar panels, a heat pump, and a battery. But it's got rid of my energy bills, which were about £3,500 per year. So it'll pay for itself in about 5.7 years on that basis, which is, if you like, an investment return. It's about 17.5% per annum, if you look at it that way. But of course, it'll carry on paying for itself after that time's up. So it's not going to suddenly stop working. So it's a bit of a no-brainer. Now, I was on a Zoom call with Ed Miliband some time ago and told him about this, and he was very keen on the idea. And I don't know if this sort of thing could come into the Great British Energy idea. Yeah. In Italy, for example, they have 110% grant for this sort of thing? You know, for insulation, for heat pumps, solar panels, you get paid an extra 10% for the time and trouble it takes to do it. So is that a sort of thing that could be included within GB Energy?
So in regards to Steve's point, I think, and I'll come back to you, John, in relation to project development, what it does, the Great British Energy, it aims to speed up the process of the old position in order to make it cheaper. That's what it's aiming to do. And therefore, we need to know who's going to benefit from that speeding up position. Is it going to be the private investment, the private investors who are potentially going to pay shareholder dividends? Or is it going to be the consumer? And is it going to be the UK taxpayer receiving that? Or is it going to be a split or all three in that sense? And we have to get that in point with that. And why I said they're going to speed it up, they're going to try and lead projects through development stages to do that. And also what is the key point of speeding it up is our tired transmission and distribution, which has lacked in investment since private ownership. And therefore, what the Great British Energy is trying to unlock is speed up the connection time for new projects to come onto the grid in order to ensure that position of being at more point. And the current waiting list for a connection, for a new connection for our transmission and distribution, so electricity can run through our network, believe it or not, is 10 to 12 years long waiting time. So you build a development, you're waiting 10 years for it be connected to UK transmission. Might be connected quicker to Europe's, but it can't be connected quicker to us because we have not got the investment to do that. So Great British Energy, in theory, would have to do that work as well, because in order to speed that up, in order to make the projects cheaper, etc., etc. And that's a plan that they must do. But if that is cheaper, then that profit, that margin should be shared between the UK taxpayer of Great British Energy, the consumer, and then if private investment is going to continue, which I'm not a full supporter, we should do it on his own, then that would have to have an agreement in place. The agreements scare me because private investment will demand for their money a more favourable return than probably what GB Energy can do. So we'd have to see what that kind of point is. In relation to John's point, Great British Energy in its network has a local power plan point, which were released by the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State. And what that would do is that would support local energy generation projects through working with local authorities and combined authorities and communities. Now, I'm not saying that's the answer to it. I'm saying that's what Labour might be doing with that local power plan to ensure cheaper bills and cheaper area in areas, working with communities, combined authorities, local authorities, in order to make that happen through that local power plan. It's also clear through their manifesto pledge on Great British Energy that it should lower bills for consumers. And I believe if it doesn't do that, it's a failed project, or it's one of its failures that it's not delivered. The situation here is we should not be in a place where we've come out of this energy crisis, where our consumers, all us, had to look at an eye-watering 450% increase in energy in a period of 7 months. And that will be because, John, that we had no control over energy suppliers or generators. And why I say that is Ofgem did not regulate and it allowed them prices to spike. If you look at the other public ownership model in France, and I'm not saying France is perfect, do not think I'm saying that politically or industrially, but France were able to, through their state-owned electricity generators, to only have a price spike of 5%, with the rest put forward through their state-owned energy company. The UK couldn't do that because of the private owned model, hence why we're playing 450% increase in a period of time, and even now still paying nigh on 70% in October the 1st higher than what it was pre-energy crisis level. So these plans in place, it's a very fledgling project. I do believe that trade unions will be involved in that, which is great, consumers also, but Great British Energy also needs to create jobs through which are good paid jobs, and also have collective bargaining and full trade union agreements in place to ensure that investment, to ensure that job creation, and to ensure that communities have jobs with good terms and conditions and not a race to the bottom is also a priority. Hope that's answered both your questions. I'm sorry if I glazed over a little bit. I will try my best, but I hope it is in there if you look at the press release by the UK government.
Thank you very much for that, Simon. I'm going to take a comment, or maybe it's a question from Jonathan, and then I think I'd like to return to Adam. Simon, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here. Jonathan.
Yeah, I had a couple of quick thoughts. Firstly, on the Steve point, I love the analogy of oven-ready projects. I think the question in my mind is, if we are batch producing these oven-ready projects, will it end up delivering lower prices for households? So the process of tendering and the process of then pricing, will that actually deliver the cheaper pricing for households? That's what I'm worried about. So I don't know if Adam or Steve have any insights to like how that would deliver guarantee lower pricing, because at the moment we already produce electricity pretty cheaply, about 7p a unit, yet households get charged about 25p a unit for all sorts of reasons in terms of the wholesale market and all the grid costs and other profits on the way to becoming the price that we pay. So I would definitely want to understand a bit more about how that delivers into lower pricing. On the zero bill home thought from John, I mean, Octopus already do zero bill homes for new development. So they already do the setup that you have with lots of solar and batteries to deliver zero bills. What I think we really need actually is low-income households, social housing, those being the priority for the low bills, because at the moment, it's actually generally more affluent, more digitally savvy people who have these very low bills. So I think whether it's done through the local power plan as part of GB Energy, or whether it's done through the warm homes part of the plan, whichever way it's delivered, it needs to deliver for everyone, not just for the more digitally savvy people who maybe have a bigger roof that they can put more solar in and have space for a battery. We need to make sure it's available to everyone. And there are things like solar streets where, entire social housing blocks can be done with the solar capacity to give them free energy, free hot water, etc. So I think the way it's done is very, very important. That's probably enough for now.
Yeah, if I could just come back first, if you don't mind. So yes, I put on the chat, I put a note in there, Jonathan. But yeah, basically, I think the idea is that because it's effectively the way you have to look at it is if the GPE put together the initial pathway bundle, and they've taken out a lot of risk, including risk in the seabed and so on. They've done geological investigation. They've clarified that the companies bidding on the round of CFD post the initial pathway, they have no risk to price in. So therefore, the CFD that is public facing in the sense that it's contract for difference that will run over 20 years or more, and that will be at a much lower rate, which means that their recovery rate, their strike price for the electricity they're selling to the grid will be substantially lower. And that's how it feeds back into lower electricity costs. I think that's a given, actually, that it's a bit like the government is publicly funding and investing and taking cost out. Therefore, on the CFD contract that is facing the grid, cost-wise, the developers and the people who buy into those projects and develop the offshore wind don't have to recover that cost.
I think my question is, I think Simon was talking about companies gaming the system to get higher prices, and I guess, would this system stop the gaming of the system to drive up CFD prices? That I know is a concern.
Just on that, I do agree with Steve that it will create much cheaper projects. It will create cheaper electricity in regards to generation. The point is that we have a system, we are regulated that sets a price cap. We've got a system where we've got generators that have been making huge profits over the last 3 to 4 years. And because of the system, they will be trying to manipulate the best profitable scenario from this. And therefore, if you add a way where you could still have a level of profit to provide investment, but not at the levels that it is now, you would even be able to get even more cheaper generation and in theory, create a social tariff or a potential funded free energy tariff for most people who are suffering in fuel poverty in order to move that forward as a state payment because of this project. There's all different things that can be done, and I think we all agree what should be done. It's just sometimes we don't agree how we get there.
Thank you for that, everyone. Adam, would you like to come in?
Yes, and hopefully that is. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, it is better this way.
Brilliant. Okay. So yeah, and apologies about earlier. So I'm now kind of both on my phone and on my laptop. So I'm going to see if I can get my slides up. The first thing I wanted to say is that everything that's just been said, I 100% agree with. Basically, I think they're really smart and intelligent questions and the right questions. I can hopefully maybe add a few points. I think the ground so far has been really productive. Let me just see if I can. Yeah, hopefully that's worked. So just a few slides on kind of what is Great British Energy. So yeah, as I said, I think earlier, people have heard it's a new publicly owned energy production company. And we did some polling that shows a really popular policy, so kind of a strong majority in favour. But also people, interestingly, are quite involved and interested in what form this takes, as I guess we've listed on this call, but I think that's true across the public more widely. So people kind of, when they've asked what they'd like this to do, a significant proportion are actually saying they wanted to be able to buy energy from this company. And actually we also found, not shown here, but that when that option was included as a function, the policy was even more popular. One other finding I'll come to is on bills as well, which I'll come to in a moment. So we've really argued that this policy is really essential and it's needed, and we argue that we need a transformation of ownership in the power system. Current model, privatization, marketization just isn't enough or sufficient, and it's actually kind of progressive in lots of ways. And we need that transformation to get towards an effective and just transition. We talk about cost, so accelerating the investment into low-cost technologies, as has been discussed, at a low-cost capital, but also critically translating those costs to consumers and to households. And I think that's the piece of the puzzle that's currently missing. So people were talking earlier about you get lower cost generation onto the system, but will that actually be seen by households anytime soon? Might probably be no. I think, unfortunately, the level of ambition that policy at the moment, there is a real risk that we don't see the benefit. But we also talk about this kind of coherence. It's the second of our 3 C's. Really investing not in terms of what's profitable or not at a project level, but what does the system actually need? And then also linking up different parts of the deployment pathway, so the seabed leasing, as we touched on, but also the planning system, supply chains, and then into energy markets. And then lastly, that certainty. So the private sector has an investment appetite, but on its own terms, and it's very kind of vulnerable to shocks in the kind of macroeconomic environment, geopolitics, interest rates, all these things which really, as everyone knows, are pretty crazy at the moment. So yeah, but the state entity can actually say, no, we will invest the long term that will really benefit the supply chain, workers, and the consumers. So yeah, so just a couple of charts. I realize people might not always love to having loads of charts on the screen, but I think that these ones are quite important. So this shows on the left-hand side what's actually happened to the price cap. And on the right-hand side, what the government thinks is going to happen for unit prices for electricity. And I think one thing to say is that the crisis was mostly caused by wholesale price shocks, but not exclusively. And that there are other bits of costs, and this is what Jonathan has just mentioned, that are increasingly important around the network costs, policy costs, which is basically the support for renewables, and some housing decarbonisation policies as well. And then also the cost of operating the system. And then if you look kind of projecting forward, actually the government has improved scenarios for prices which they use for their modelling. And they're actually not seeing, even in the low scenario, prices coming back below the group prices level, even up to 2040, which for me is quite shocking. This is like government analysis. And I think one thing to say is that this is kind of modelling by the previous government, so we'd be interested to see new modelling. But I think even with the new policies, I think it's unlikely to, in the near term, see significant reductions in bills, unless the government gets very lucky with fossil fuel prices, which, to be honest, looking at the world, say the Middle East, and things happening recently, like I don't think we can rely on that. So I really think there's more policy ambition needed. I guess one other thing to say, and maybe Jonathan will say this later, but is that with the recent cuts to benefits of fuel, fuel allowance, it's like even more of a bigger issue for the government and obviously for people. So here we've got another kind of polling result, and this is looking just at Labour voters, showing that people really expect GB Energy to be lowering their bills over 5 years. So it's a majority of 53% who say that they think it will decrease bills. But then if we look on the right, this is, again, a modelling scenario of wholesale prices this time. And it just shows that vulnerability to fossil fuel prices. Again, using the old kind of modelling, but there's a real problem here. There's a mismatch between what politicians are saying and what their own modelling under the hood is actually showing. And kind of taking all of this, we thought about this and thought, well, how can you solve this? And what we're advocating is a retail arm, GB Energy. We think consumers should be able to directly buy from this institution, and we think it can be part of the solution in distributing costs. So, as with many things, there are costs to cleaning ourselves up and getting to net zero. The question is, how do you distribute those costs? I think the current system is just wildly unfair and actually inefficient. So it actually creates all these kind of redundancies in the system where retailers are kind of trying to hedge prices, but then the CFD mechanism is separately hedging prices. You have issues with liquidity in the market, so people wanting to buy longer term, but then people wanting to sell short term. We have this crazy situation balancing where we often have kind of energy that can't be used because of a lack of the network. And obviously at the sharp edge, we just have consumers paying the price for all of this. So what we've really said is that the government needs to look towards committing, and basically this would be kind of like a U-turn, but committing to a retail arm, GB Energy. And we think that there's a kind of a strong kind of social justice case for that, but also just like an efficiency and kind of deliverability case for that. And we think that this can be done. We set out some kind of technical details on how it can be done. But unfortunately, at the moment, this isn't the government's position. And I think what could change that would really be a big public push by people who are actually really hurt by the current system and critically who could benefit from reform. So we're kind of hoping for public attitudes, and maybe this group is the start of something to actually push for something here. So that's kind of my overall view. I could stop there, but just to maybe come back on a couple of the questions from earlier. On wind in particular, and the question of will we get cheaper offshore wind, and will this feed through to the strike price? I think that the answer to that is a bit unclear, because there's a lot of kind of like market power amongst the offshore wind developers, particularly as they're being asked to so massively increase the amount of capacity that's being built. But even if their costs are actually lower, it's not clear that they won't just lead to higher profits for them, and they won't necessarily have that kind of competitive pressure to actually feed that through to the strike price and therefore to consumers. So I would worry about that. And as I mentioned earlier, I used to work in the government department that runs these auctions. And my experience was that all of the power really is not with the government, it's actually with the developers, and that's because of the kind of privatized system we have. So I would worry about relying on that. And I think that we really need to push for public ownership, as a simple kind of way to overcome that. One other thing to say, and I would mention this in Simon's views as well, but is the role of like workers and trade unions in this. I think has been kind of underdeveloped, and I think there's a question in my mind about like, what the workers in this industry really want out of GB Energy, and we should really be led by that. And I think one thing they might want is better protections at work, better training. There is a big issue for offshore workers, and the ability to transition from offshore oil and gas, subsea lining, into offshore wind and other technologies. So I would say that GB Energy, where it's doing these deals to help developers, should have strong conditionality in place about rules for how they treat their workers, and how they pay for their training and allow their transition. And the final thing is they should be targeting a UK supply chain, because at the moment a lot of the value is going abroad, and I think we really need like a developer to say, no, we want this in the UK, we want an industrial strategy, we want the jobs here. Obviously, you can't completely do that. You always have to rely on global markets, but really, I think basically every other country in Europe tries to aim for a domestic supply chain, and the UK is the exception. And I think that's just like really unacceptable. So I really think there needs to be a push on that front as well, particularly as there are people who are going to be losing their jobs in oil and gas. But we know that's not just there, but it's deindustrialization really across our country. And we really need to address that, and Labour government should be doing that. And the kind of the last round of deindustrialization with coal was really a disaster socially. So we need to avoid that. And this is part of solving that issue. So I'll probably end there. I've probably gone over slightly, but I think that was interesting.
Thanks so much for that, Adam. I'm very glad we got there in the end. And yeah, obviously stick around after we hear Jonathan. We are going to have a bit more discussion. Jonathan is the Policy and Parliament Lead at Fuel Poverty Action. And yeah, Jonathan, take it away. I look forward to hearing what you've got to say on this subject. Oh, Jonathan, are you still with us?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So I'll try and avoid duplicating anything that's been said. I'm going to focus mainly on the pricing question. So as Adam was just saying, the government forecasts of energy prices are that they won't really go down in the foreseeable future from now to 2030 or even to 2040. Now, obviously, that's a huge, huge issue for the millions of people who can't afford to pay their bills now. The thought that that could continue indefinitely is obviously pretty scary. And we've obviously got some of the support systems like the winter fuel payment going, which is going to create even more pain and winter deaths this winter and for many more winters unless we change things. So we're obviously in a bad place, and the forecasts are not really for it to get any better anytime soon. Now, we've had a bit of a debate about could we save a little bit of money on the generation side. So I think that's an open question, it seems. But even if we were to deliver a bit of a saving on the generation side, which is possible for the reasons that Steve was talking about particularly, that's still not going to make a big dent in the energy price, because there's huge costs, as Adam was just covering, in other parts of the system, like the distribution costs, the transmission costs, storage. There's lots of other costs in the system, and some of those costs will be going up. So there's a big increase in the need for the grid upgrades and storage. So if you look at the whole picture, it doesn't look very optimistic to me as I see it, even if the generation bit goes to plan. So that means, I think, that the whole system needs to be looked at. We need to be thinking much more radically about how we change the whole system, not just the generation piece of it. And we need to be looking at cutting costs out and cutting profits out of the entire system. And that's why I think, the scope of GB Energy needs to be much bigger. We need to be looking at every part of that system, not just certain parts, and trying to get rid of some of the wasteful parts, like energy trading, for example. I'm very concerned that there's, large money made through speculation, and that's also actually created worse spikes that we saw during the energy crisis, where we suddenly had crazy pricing. So there's a lot wrong in different parts of the energy system. So I think just improving generation a bit is only a small piece of the work we need to do. If we think about what kind of saving we should be looking for, well, of course, during the election, the government promised, the now government, Labour Party then, promised us £300 average bill saving, which feels like a decent amount, actually. I mean, it's the kind of saving that Energy for All would deliver. So to deliver that in 5 years with an investment of 8.3 billion seems a reasonable investment. In fact, that probably would be a decent use of public money if that were delivered. Now, of course, since the election, there's been a bit of a slippage in terms of whether they're actually committing to deliver that. And that specific number was based on outdated analysis. So actually, it's a pretty dubious number. Now, I was in a session with a presentation with Chris Stark last week, who's heads up the clean energy mission, and I asked him a question at the end about the £300. Now, he said that is still the target, which was perhaps a surprise to some of the audience. And I spoke to him later privately, and he kind of said, look, I want to work with you guys and others to get the pricing down. But, the question in my mind is how realistic that is with the current plans in place. And I'm still pretty skeptical that we can deliver that. So market reform needs to be more radical. There's been an ongoing question about decoupling electricity from gas pricing. So given that hasn't happened, as was expected maybe a couple of years ago, this is the fact that when gas prices shoot up, our electricity prices shoot up as well because of the way electricity is currently priced. If there is a Middle East price spike, we will have potentially another big spike in our prices, including electricity, if that happened this year or next year, whatever happens on GB Energy. So the fact we haven't reformed those parts of the market leaves us very vulnerable, however well or badly GB Energy itself is actually going. So therefore, we really need to push for much more radical change to this market. And I think there's a danger that people think GB Energy is the answer to everything, and therefore the pushes from organizations like ours for radical change in the market are being pushed back on the basis that GB Energy will, like the White Knight, will come to the rescue very soon. But I think at the moment, given the scale of ambition for GB Energy, it will definitely not deliver what we need. And therefore, we either need to expand the scope of GB Energy, or we need to continue to push for the other important changes in the market, including Energy for All, which would obviously guarantee everyone has the energy they need to stay alive, in the winter, and for all they need the rest of the year as well. So either we need to make things like Energy for All part of GB Energy, or we need to continue to have them as separate things that we will fight to be part of the overall plan. So that's probably enough for now. Maybe we'll discuss some more questions.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan, for that. Yeah, really appreciate you filling us in as well from a fuel poverty action and Energy for All perspective. Yeah, so it's back to our audience for comments, questions, contributions. Yeah, especially if you haven't had a chance to speak already, please put your hand up and come on in. Yeah, just remember that I am aware that these conversations can very quickly become very technical. So I just want to say that there are no silly questions, yeah, feel free to come in with anything that you feel you need clarification about. Ali, yes, please, welcome.
Hi there, my name's Ali. I just have a quick question around pricing, in that I'm interested to know your views about whether there's value in having high electricity prices in terms of supporting action to reduce the amount of energy we use. Because obviously if energy is more expensive, there's an incentive to use less of it. Clearly that doesn't tackle the fuel poverty angle, and there needs to be a change in the way we price electricity. But is the answer just lower prices, or is the answer lower prices for a certain amount of electricity and higher prices for excessive use of electricity, if that makes sense?
Thanks for that. Jonathan, I'm going to let you answer that.
Well, as you may or may not know, the Energy for All proposal that we have a lot of support behind is actually a rising block tariff, which is along the lines of what you've just described, which is you get a certain amount of free energy for your essential needs. Then you have a certain amount of regular energy, and then much higher levels of consumption are at a higher price. So we do believe that that kind of a system is the right pricing system. It's actually the opposite of our current system. So our current system, you pay a standing charge, quite a large one now, about £330 for both energy, but about, say, £220 roughly for electricity. And then you pay a certain amount per unit. So those people using less actually are paying more per unit. So it's the opposite of logically what you would do for both the environment and also the economics of the industry, are that if we were all low consumers, things would be a lot cheaper. We wouldn't need to use much fossil fuel. We wouldn't need to do as much build out of the grid. We wouldn't need to build as many wind farms. It would be a lot cheaper if everyone was a low user. So we definitely want to get to a system that is much more in line with what's right for the economics and also for the environment. Obviously, we do need to protect people who need improvements to their heating systems, for example. So some people have very inefficient heating systems. Obviously, we need to upgrade those systems and we need to protect them until that is possible. So there needs to be a fair transition to this, but obviously where we should be heading is a more efficient system with that kind of pricing structure that you were talking about.
Thank you. And I guess the benefit of that as well is presumably that the cost of that is minimal in terms of the extra cost of the more expensive electricity would outweigh the lower cost of the free or cheap electricity. So in terms of the arguments that it can't be afforded, that's not a valid argument in the case of this proposal. So that sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Adam, you'd like to come in on that as well?
Yeah, just to make, I mean, I agree with Jonathan that we just said, and we're kind of a voice of the energy proposal, but also when it comes to kind of like emissions from housing, energy, it's really the problem is gas, and actually getting affordable and cheap electricity specifically really helps with the transition away from gas into heating. So I think that's, but also the domestic transport as well with electric vehicles, having affordable electricity is really essential. So actually, I think having high electricity actually would have a negative impact on decarbonization. I mean, in the very long term, there is a question about pricing and its impact on consumption. But I think for the next 3 decades, really getting affordable electricity will actually be a big help. And part of that is the way that we put levies on electricity that don't go into gas. So that's the big part of it.
You're on mute, Mile.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Yeah, no, thanks for that, Adam. I actually wanted to ask you a question, because you mentioned the need for public ownership of energy, and maybe this got lost for me in the discussion in the talks earlier, but you know, isn't that what GB energy is also promising?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's what it's promising. It's a question: is it what it will deliver? So there's kind of different conceptions of what this could look like. So, and actually different conceptions within the cabinet. So there's a kind of the vision of, you know, it fully owning assets and really embedding public ownership, or there's the kind of vision that's been put forward by like Bannon, for example, during the election campaign, which is it's just de-risking private sector-led projects that won't have ownership. So that's actually an area of kind of political contest. But we obviously strongly favor one of those. And it's like perhaps I think there's also a question of like how far do you go. So the capital for the money is really quite small, and so it's the stepping stone towards public ownership. But we'd say longer term it needs to be ramped up towards kind of basically corporate benefit of the system. So how you start on that journey is really important, and we think like an extent it can kind of build a momentum of its own. If it gets kind of public buy-in towards, you know, keep pushing public.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's really useful. I had no conception that there was such a political contest at the heart of the party over public ownership. Yeah, that's a very interesting insight. Yeah, I'd like to invite everyone again to you know, bring your questions to the table. Actually, that reminds me that we did have a question from Dave earlier in the chat. Dave said, from what has been said, I think this was back when Simon was speaking, but I think, yeah, Jonathan, Adam, you can definitely speak on this. From what has been said, this plan sounds underfunded from the beginning. Why have Labour not put forward a profit take from the energy industry to properly fund this, or a wealth tax? And I think maybe that also links to you know, what you were just saying, Adam, about, you know, how far, yeah, making decisions based on how far you think the money can go.
Yeah, so I mean, I completely agree with the question. It's not enough money to do what it should do. But the question of why haven't they done more? I mean, something says that the funding that is there is kind of nominally being funded by slightly increased windfall tax on oil and gas producers, a temporary time bound increase in windfall tax. Personally, I do think that should go much further. There should be much higher tax of that industry. But also, as we mentioned in the question, kind of a wealth tax. I think at the moment the politics are just not there for that kind of set of policies. Within the current Labour Party, but I think that there's, you know, they may end up having to go there. So that's kind of why I'd say at the moment they ideologically disagree with that, and they're worried to an extent politically, and also point to the role of the Treasury as an institution and kind of opposing some of those, and also the fossil fuel lobbyists and just general corporate lobbyists. I mean, I'm going to the Labour Party conference this weekend, and just the amount of corporate lobbyists that are on the programme agenda is quite absurd. So that's just something we need to be aware of. It's probably why, if I'm honest, that's not really looked at the moment, but I think it's pretty essential.
Thank you. Jonathan, do you want to come in on that as well?
Yeah, Adam has got to the point I was going to make, which was, I think the simple answer is corporate lobbying. There's obviously huge profits in the industry that could be used, and they're only taking a smallish slice of that profit for this to fund this initiative. And obviously they could go in much more aggressively, but the story they've been persuaded by the lobbyists is if they take too much profit away, then that will scare away investment and that will undermine the whole transition. So they pretty much bought the lobbyist story, and that's why there's limited funding. In terms of wealth tax, I think the issue of going outside the energy industry is that you then get into the question about maybe that wealth tax should be used for other things, like sorting out the health service, etc. There's enough money in the energy industry, so that's where I think they should be looking for funding energy initiatives.
Thank you. Ali, you had another question. Do you want to just come in and say it?
So I don't want to hog in case someone else has some questions. So if anyone wants to go first, please do.
Feels like it's just you right now.
Okay. I was interested, obviously, with Labour Party conference coming up and with budget and that kind of thing on the way. I was just wondering where you felt that the Labour Party stands on some of these issues, such as moving those green levies off electricity bills onto general taxation, or maybe getting rid of standing charges. Do you think there's any appetite for those kind of things, which feel that they're kind of fairly cost neutral in terms of the cost to the exchequer, I guess, to Rachel Reeves?
Yeah, Jonathan.
I can pick up the standing charges one first, maybe. So, I mean, there's currently an Ofgem consultation that actually we've been circulating a petition on, because the Ofgem proposal is a small change to the system rather than the more radical promise. Now, obviously, Labour and other parties have committed to reform of standing charges rather than eliminating them. So this kind of tweak by Ofgem is probably going to be seen by Labour as job done, but obviously we're going to be putting loads of pressure on them, saying that that's not enough. So that's really up to us to apply that pressure. I think if we don't apply the pressure, the small change is all that's going to happen.
Thank you. And so is a specific ask there, if we're going to talk to our Labour MPs to push that further and rather than just removing those standing charges? Would that be the ask?
Yeah, definitely, because there's a buck passing going on between government and Ofgem that happens on a lot of issues. Obviously, there's lots of parts of the standing charge, and Ofgem pretty much say, well, we only control some of it, government controls some of it in terms of the levies. So it ends up a circular argument because it doesn't all sit in one camp, but obviously they need to bang their heads together and sort out all the issues. The other part of it obviously is the operating costs that sit within there that we believe are excessive. So looking at all the elements of the standing charge, there's good arguments for shifting a lot of that off. And obviously the whole principle, as we already said, is that standing charges are the opposite of the kind of structure you would want on energy pricing, both economically, ethically also, and environmentally.
Thanks, that makes a lot of sense. Cheers.
I have a question.
Yeah, please, welcome.
I'm on the phone. Yeah, it's Steve from Rising Tide UK. Do any of you know, about 18 months ago, I think, a bill sailed through Parliament with Labour Party whip support for a new funding model for new nuclear projects, which would include a supplement, so-called green, although obviously it isn't green, levy on electricity bills. Do we know now they're in power whether or not they've got any intentions to go ahead with that?
Adam, do you want to come in?
It's a good question. I actually don't know on what the thinking is. My suspicion is they will probably proceed with our model. It's kind of packaged as Great British Nuclear. I think this might be right doing it. Because there's two elements. There's the support for the very large projects, as we'll see, and Hinkley Point. There's also these like small modular reactors, and I think on both counts it would be the current policy. It would be me that on consumers, but I don't know the detail. I think it's actually a good point on that. Yeah, that's probably the best thing to say now.
Yeah, Jonathan.
Yeah, no, it is a good question. I'm very worried about the whole Great British Nuclear side, because I think that's clearly not going to deliver, regardless of the safety issues, etc., around decommissioning, etc. I think the cost structure and the timescales of it are so unfavourable that I'm really worried about money going into that. In terms of that levy, there was some talk, I believe, about only the levy only going on to businesses, not onto household bills. So I'm not sure exactly where that's going to land under Labour, but that was one of the discussions that was going on.
On the subject of, I guess, nuclear power, which to me is a bit of a false solution. Is there also a risk for a lot of investment going towards other false solutions, like whether they be for energy production or other things like carbon capture and storage? Yeah, Jonathan.
Yeah, I've got concerns about well, certainly any use of hydrogen outside its essential needs in terms of certain industrial processes, carbon capture. Some of the subsidy structures that were being set up for that also extremely worrying. So yeah, I think there are definitely concerns on all those areas.
Maybe just to add on that, I mean, I think it's like a nuanced thing on all of those technologies. I agree with Jonathan that the issue is around how they're being funded. So for carbon capture, I think it is one where it's going to be mostly second funded, with some small exceptions, but it's massively overcost and delayed. And I think it's heavily prioritised model, and I think it's the kind of, if we're doing this kind of all in 20 years, it might be we're talking about the disaster to prioritise carbon capture and a system and its impact on so I think that's one to watch and keep an eye on. And whatever your view on the technology itself, I think the way it's being structured and delivered, that's not an error.
Thank you. Thanks again, Adam. Do either of you have any final words you wanna close the session with before I close?
I guess maybe just to say, like, thank you for having me, and like at Commonwealth, we're going to be continuing to push on this, and we really welcome like people sharing their views. So please do follow us on social media, etc., and read our articles, and get in contact with us. And my email address will be available. I think really interested in saying keep on the pressure on the UNP or whatever.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I can just thank everyone for the great questions, great discussion. It's been really interesting. Thanks.
Cheers, Jonathan. Yeah, thank you everyone else. Thank you, Adam, Jonathan, and Simon, who's obviously not here, for joining. And thank you everyone else for listening in and participating. And yeah, for generally just making this a very informative session as usual. Just to close off on our end, for those of you who don't know, at Fuel Poverty Action, we are campaigning for every household to be guaranteed enough energy to cover needs like adequate heating, lighting, cooking, and access to medical or mobility aids through our Energy for All campaign, which Jonathan has mentioned, and I put a link in the chat there. As well as the current action we have on standing charges, you can also take action on fuel poverty by signing our manifesto, which is here. And yeah, please let us know how you found the session in the feedback form. That is also there. Our next session actually will be with a heavier focus on energy pricing. So please keep a lookout for that. An announcement should come soon. If everyone is up for it, please unmute yourselves, put your cameras on, and say and wave us good evening. We always like to have that at the end of the session. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. That was really good. Appreciate it.
Bye.